I need you to understand something before I start, because if you don't, then none of this will land the way it should. I'm not telling this story because I want attention. I'm telling it because there's a part of it I can't carry anymore. And if I don't put it somewhere outside of me, it's going to keep replaying the same 2 seconds over and over, until there's nothing left of me that isn't stuck in that moment. It was only 2 seconds. That's the part that ruins me. 2 seconds on a monitor, a shape that shouldn't exist, something so large it didn't fit into the frame properly. And then the feed cut like it had been swallowed. We told ourselves it was a glitch. We had to. Because the alternative meant that everything we thought we knew about what lives down there was wrong. And if that was wrong, then what else were we wrong about? I didn't think those 2 seconds would follow me home. I didn't think they would change the way I hear silence. I didn't think they would take something from me that I can't get back. But they did. And I'm going to tell you how it happened, even the parts I wish I could forget, especially those. It started quietly, the way most bad things do, with something that didn't feel important enough to remember. We were on a routine survey run, nothing unusual, just another stretch of cold water and mapped coordinates that had already been passed over a dozen times. The kind of assignment you take when you're not expecting anything to happen. The sea was calm in that deceptive way, flat but heavy, like it was holding something underneath. I remember joking about it early on, something dry and pointless, just to break the monotony. We had been out there long enough that even the equipment hum started to feel like part of our breathing. There were only a few of us in the control room, lights dimmed, screens casting that blue glow that makes everything look a little unreal. I liked that part. It made it easier to forget how far down we were looking. Easier to pretend it was just data, just images, not a place. The narrator in me wants to say I noticed something was off right away, but that wouldn't be honest. The truth is, I almost missed it. A flicker on one of the secondary feeds, something that could have been interference or sediment drifting too close to the lens. I remember leaning back, half paying attention, thinking about coffee more than anything else. But there was a sound. Not loud, just a slight shift in the room, the way one of the others stopped typing. That kind of silence doesn't happen for no reason. It spreads. You feel it before you understand it. "What was that?" someone said, but not in a panicked way. More like curiosity, like they expected a simple answer. I leaned forward then, focusing on the feed. It was already gone. Just dark water and particulate drifting like slow snowfall. Nothing there. Nothing to justify the way the air had changed. We rewound it. That's the moment I wish we hadn't. Frame by frame, slow enough that you start to question your own eyes. At first, it looked like shadow, a distortion, something too big to process as a single object. It moved across the frame in a way that didn't match the current, didn't match anything we had cataloged before. And then, just for a fraction of a second, it resolved into something clearer. Not fully, never fully, but enough. A curve, a mass, texture that wasn't rock, wasn't debris. It had intention. That's the word that keeps coming back to me. It didn't drift. It passed. No one spoke for a few seconds after that. You'd think there would be shouting or questions, but it was the opposite. Just this heavy, shared pause, where everyone is waiting for someone else to explain it away. "It's just noise," someone finally said. "Compression artifact." And we all nodded, because that was the easiest version of reality to accept. But we didn't stop there. That's the thing about curiosity. It doesn't let you leave well enough alone. We enhanced the image, adjusted contrast, tried to isolate the shape. Every pass made it worse. More defined, more wrong. It wasn't just large, it was too large. The kind of scale that doesn't fit into the categories we're comfortable with. You don't expect something like that to move the way it did, slow but deliberate, like it wasn't in a hurry because nothing down there could challenge it. I remember feeling this strange pull in my chest, not fear exactly, not yet, but something close. Like standing too close to the edge of something deep and realizing you can't see the bottom. We argued about it for a while. Technical explanations, sensor glitches, misinterpretation, all the usual defenses. And for a while, those explanations held. They had to. Because if we accepted what it looked like, then we had to accept that it had been there, right in front of our equipment, within range, close enough to be seen. And if it was that close, then it had chosen to pass by. That was the first crack. We kept recording, of course. That's what we were there for. Data doesn't care about your comfort. The hours stretched on, the ocean staying stubbornly empty on the screens. But something had changed in the way we watched. Every flicker felt heavier. Every shadow demanded attention. At some point, someone laughed, too loud. The kind of laugh that tries to reset the room. It didn't work. I went back to the clip again when no one was looking. Just me and the feed, looping those frames. I slowed it down even more, isolating the moment where the shape was most visible. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a shift in the particulate around it. Not just displacement, but pattern. Like the water itself reacted before the shape fully entered the frame. A subtle disturbance ahead of it. Like something that size didn't just move through the water. It pushed it. I sat there longer than I should have, staring at that detail, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. But the more I watched, the harder it became to ignore the scale implied by that movement. That was the moment curiosity turned into something else. We didn't tell anyone right away. That part always sounds worse when I say it out loud, but at the time, it felt reasonable. We needed to be sure. We needed more data. That's what we told ourselves. In reality, I think we were buying time. Time to make sense of it. Time to decide what it meant. The next few hours passed slowly. Too slowly. The kind of time that stretches because you're waiting for something you don't fully understand. The feed remained empty, but the absence started to feel deliberate. Like we had seen something we weren't supposed to, and now it had chosen not to show itself again. I remember checking the depth readout more often than necessary. There was something about the number that started to feel heavier. It wasn't just a measurement anymore. It was distance. Between us and whatever was down there. At some point, we picked up a faint anomaly on a secondary sensor. Not visual. Movement. Large-scale displacement, but inconsistent. It didn't track like anything we were familiar with. It appeared, disappeared, reappeared at a different point, as if whatever it was could move faster than the system could reliably follow. That's when the room shifted again. Probably interference, someone said, but there was less confidence this time. We cross-referenced the data. Different systems, same general region. Not exact, but close enough to matter. It wasn't random. And then, without warning, the primary feed flickered. Not off, not completely, just a brief distortion, like the signal had been bent. The image warped for a fraction of a second, and in that distortion, there was something. Not clear, not defined, but there. Close. Too close. The feed stabilized immediately after, back to empty water. Nothing to see. Nothing to confirm. But we had all seen it. No one laughed that time. We didn't need to say it out loud, but the thought was there, shared between us in that quiet, unspoken way. It hadn't left. It had come closer. I felt it then, properly. Not curiosity, not uncertainty. Fear, but not the sharp kind. Something slower, heavier. The kind that settles in your chest and doesn't move. We debated pulling the equipment back. It came up, briefly, then got dismissed just as quickly. There was no official reason to abort, no confirmed threat, just a series of anomalies and a clip we couldn't fully explain. So we stayed. That decision sits with me more than anything else, because what came next wasn't immediate. It didn't happen in a burst. It built, slowly, quietly. The kind of escalation you don't recognize until you're already too deep into it. The sensors began to behave erratically. Nothing dramatic, just small inconsistencies. Readings that didn't align perfectly, slight delays, minor fluctuations. Easy to overlook individually. Together, they formed a pattern that didn't make sense. And then the audio picked something up. At first, we thought it was mechanical. A low-frequency vibration, barely audible, more felt than heard. It pulsed irregularly, like it wasn't coming from a machine. Like it had rhythm, but not one we could map easily. We increased the gain, filtered out background noise, tried to isolate the source. The more we cleaned it, the worse it became. It wasn't random. It had structure. That's when someone suggested it might be biological. No one liked that idea. We listened to it longer than we should have. There was something about it that pulled at your attention, made it hard to look away from the waveform on the screen. It rose and fell in a way that felt almost intentional. Not communication. Not exactly, but not meaningless either. I remember thinking, briefly, that it sounded like something calling. And then the feed cut. Not flickered, not distorted. Gone. Every screen tied to that camera went black at the same time. No warning, no gradual failure, just instant absence. For a second, no one moved. Then everything happened at once. Voices, commands, attempts to re-establish the signal. Systems checked, connections verified. Nothing obvious had failed. No alerts that matched what we were seeing. It didn't make sense. And then, just as suddenly as it had disappeared, the feed came back. 2 seconds, that's all we got. 2 seconds of image before it cut again, this time for good. But those 2 seconds were enough. The frame was filled, not partially, not distorted into ambiguity, filled. There was no room left for doubt, no space for alternative explanations. It was there, directly in front of the camera, close enough that the edges of it disappeared beyond the limits of the lens. Texture, movement, scale that didn't feel real. And an eye. That's the part I can't let go of. It wasn't centered, it wasn't framed dramatically. It was just there, off to one side, massive and still, catching the faintest bit of light from the equipment. Not glowing, not exaggerated, just present, looking, not past the camera, at it, at us. And then the signal cut. Completely. No recovery, no explanation, just silence where the feed had been. No one spoke for a long time after that. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound inadequate. The room felt smaller somehow, like the space itself had tightened. We didn't need to replay it. We all saw it clearly enough the first time. That was the moment everything shifted from uncertainty to something else entirely. Because it wasn't just that something massive existed down there. It was that it had approached the camera, deliberately. It had come close enough to fill the frame, to be seen, to be recorded. And it had looked back. The rest of what happened after that doesn't come in clean order anymore. It's fragmented. Pieces of memory that don't quite line up the way they should. Procedures, reports, discussions that felt distant, even as they were happening. We pulled the equipment back eventually, not because we wanted to, but because we had no choice. Without the feed, there was nothing more to gather. The ascent felt longer than it should have. Every meter gained felt like something we were taking away from whatever was down there. Or maybe something we were bringing up with us. I remember standing there, watching the numbers change, feeling this strange mix of relief, and something else I didn't want to name. Because leaving didn't feel like escape. It felt like interruption, like we had been allowed to see something and then cut off before we understood it. And that's what stayed with me. Not just the image, not just those 2 seconds, but the feeling that it wasn't random, that it had chosen that moment, that it had known we were watching. I tried to move on after that. We all did. Reports were filed, data was reviewed, conclusions were adjusted, language softened, possibilities narrowed into something more acceptable. But none of that changed what I saw. And none of it changed the way silence feels now. Because sometimes, when it's quiet enough, I can still hear that low-frequency sound. Not clearly, not exactly the same, but close enough that it pulls me back. Back to that room, back to that screen, back to those 2 seconds that should have been impossible. And the worst part isn't the size of it, or the fact that it exists. It's the certainty that for a brief moment, in that dark stretch of water, something ancient and massive looked directly at us, and didn't seem surprised. I didn't think 2 seconds could ruin a life. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the size of it, not the fact that it exists, just the length of time. 2 seconds on a monitor, a shape that shouldn't be there, something so large it didn't fit into the frame. And then the feed cut like it had been taken. Not lost. Taken. If it had just glitched, I could have moved on. If it had been unclear, I could have doubted it. But it wasn't. And I didn't. And now I can't. Because whatever we saw, it saw us too. And I think that's where this actually starts, not with the sighting, but with the moment I realized it wasn't accidental. We were out there for something routine. That's how these stories always begin, I guess. Nothing special. Just another survey, another patch of ocean that had already been mapped and logged and archived. The kind of job you take when you expect boredom more than anything else. The water was calm, flat in that unnatural way, where it feels like it's hiding something beneath it. I remember making a joke about that early on. Nobody really laughed. Not because it wasn't funny, but because we were already tired. Long hours, recycled air, that low mechanical hum that starts to feel like it's coming from inside your own head. The control room was dim, just screens and shadows, blue light everywhere. It made the footage feel distant, like we weren't really looking at a real place. That helped. It made it easier to forget the depth, the pressure. The fact that there was an entire world down there we barely understood. I almost missed it. That's the truth. If someone else hadn't stopped moving, hadn't gone quiet in that specific way, I probably wouldn't have looked twice. It was just a flicker on a secondary feed, something passing too fast to register properly. Could have been interference. Could have been debris. "What was that?" someone said. Not fear. Not yet. Just curiosity. We rewound it. That was the mistake. Frame by frame, the shape started to form. At first it didn't look like anything, just shadow, distortion. But then it held together long enough to become something. A curve, mass, movement that didn't match the current, didn't match anything. "It's noise," someone said quickly. Too quickly. We all agreed, because we needed to. But we didn't stop watching. That's the problem. Curiosity doesn't let you walk away clean. We enhanced it, slowed it further, pushed contrast until the image started to fall apart. But the shape didn't. It stayed. And the more we looked, the worse it got. It wasn't just big, it was wrong. Not in a dramatic way, not in a cinematic way. In a quiet, undeniable way. The kind of scale your brain resists at first, the kind that doesn't fit into categories you're used to. I went back to it alone later, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. That's when I saw it. The water moved before it entered the frame. Not because of current, not because of drift, because something that large doesn't just pass through water, it pushes it. That detail stayed with me longer than anything else at the time, longer than the shape, longer than the size, because it made it real in a way I couldn't explain away. We didn't report it immediately. That sounds worse now than it did then. At the time, it felt like caution, verification. We needed more data. That's what we said. But really, we were hesitating, because once you say something like that out loud, once you commit to it, you can't take it back. The hours after that felt different, slower, heavier. The screens were mostly empty, but nobody treated them that way anymore. Every flicker mattered. Every shadow meant something. And then the sensors started picking up movement. Not visual, not at first, just displacement, large scale, irregular, appearing in one place, then another, faster than it should have been able to move if it followed anything we understood. Interference, someone said again, but no one believed it this time. We cross-checked systems, different sensors, same region. Something was there, and it was moving. The feed flickered once, just once, a brief distortion, like the image had bent. And inside that distortion, something shifted, closer. That's when the room changed. No one laughed, no one joked. The air got tight in that quiet way, where you don't need anyone to say what they're thinking. It hadn't passed by. It was still there. I felt it then. Not panic, not yet. Something heavier, something slower. Like standing near something deep and realizing it's looking back. We should have pulled the equipment up. That's the part I go over again and again. We didn't. Because we didn't have proof. Just fragments. Just enough to worry us, not enough to justify stopping. So we stayed. And then the audio picked it up. Low frequency, barely audible, more vibration than sound. It pulsed irregularly, but not randomly. There was structure to it, pattern. We cleaned the signal. That made it worse, because it wasn't noise. It had rhythm. I remember thinking it sounded like, not a call, not exactly, but close enough that the thought wouldn't leave once it was there. And then the feed cut. Instantly. No warning, no degradation. Just gone. Everyone froze for a second, like the room itself had lost power, even though everything else was still running. Then movement, voices, attempts to reconnect, check systems. Nothing was wrong, nothing we could fix. And then it came back. 2 seconds. That's all. 2 seconds that stretched longer than anything I've ever experienced. The frame wasn't partial this time. It was filled. There was no space left to question what we were seeing, no room for doubt, no distortion to hide behind. It was right there, directly in front of the camera, so close that parts of it disappeared beyond the edges. Texture, movement, scale that didn't feel possible. And then, the eye. Off-center, not framed, not dramatic, just there. Still, catching the faintest light, looking straight into the camera, not past it, not through it, at us. And then the signal cut again, this time for good. No recovery, no explanation, just black. No one spoke. There wasn't anything to say that didn't feel small, inadequate. The room felt different after that, smaller, like the walls had moved in without us noticing. We didn't replay it. We didn't need to. We all saw it clearly enough. That was the moment everything shifted. Not just because something that size exists, but because it didn't behave like something unaware. It came close. It aligned itself with the camera. It looked. That's the part that stays. Not the teeth, not the body, not the scale. The awareness. We pulled the equipment back after that. Not immediately, Not dramatically, just eventually, quietly, like we were trying not to draw attention to the decision. The ascent felt wrong, too long. Every meter felt like we were leaving something unfinished, or bringing something back with us. I kept thinking about those 2 seconds, about the timing, the way it appeared only after everything else had built up, the way the signal cut immediately after. It didn't feel random. It felt controlled. That thought never left. Even now, it hasn't. Because you can explain size. You can explain unknown species. You can even explain anomalies if you try hard enough. But intention? That's harder. And the worst part is this. Whatever was down there didn't react like it had been discovered. It reacted like it had been watching us for a while, and finally decided to let us see it. I need to keep this part short, because the more I sit in it, the harder it gets to separate what I know from what I'm afraid is true. After those 2 seconds, after the eye, after the feed went dead, we told ourselves it was over. Equipment failure, anomaly, something we'd log, soften, and move past. That's what we agreed on, quietly. No one pushed back. But the problem is, it didn't feel over. The silence after the signal cut wasn't normal. I've spent enough time around those systems to know what off sounds like. This wasn't off. It was empty. Like something had been there a moment ago and left too fast. We started the retrieval process anyway. Routine, controlled, mechanical movements, voices kept low, like volume itself might matter. The numbers on the depth readout started ticking up, slow and steady. And then they didn't. For a few seconds, the ascent stalled. No alarms, no warnings. Just stopped. Someone muttered that it was lag. Someone else said tension in the line. Simple explanations, easy ones. But I was watching the secondary sensors, and something moved again. Not far, closer than before. The same kind of displacement as earlier, but tighter, more focused. Not drifting across a wide area this time, circling. That's the only word that fits. Circling us. I didn't say it out loud. I think I was afraid that if I did, it would make it real in a way we couldn't undo. The audio picked it up again, too. That low, pulsing vibration. Stronger this time. Not louder exactly, just clearer. Like it didn't have to travel as far. The ascent resumed suddenly, like nothing had happened. Too suddenly, too clean. And right before the signal logs cut completely, there was one last spike on the system. Not visual, just a reading. Distance. Closer than anything that size should have been able to get without touching us. That's where the data ends. That's where the report stops. But that's not where it ended for me. Because ever since that day, I can't shake the feeling that those 2 seconds weren't the encounter. They were the warning. And whatever was down there didn't lose us when the feed cut. It just didn't need the camera anymore. I told myself I wouldn't check the logs again. That I'd leave it where we all agreed to leave it. Filed, reduced, explained just enough to make it acceptable. But that didn't last. It never does. Curiosity doesn't fade after something like that. It sharpens. So I went back. Alone. Not to the footage. We didn't have that anymore. Just fragments, corrupted pulls, system records, numbers, timestamps. The kind of data that feels safe because it isn't supposed to carry emotion. But it does, if you stare at it long enough. I started with the final moments before the last cut, the 2 seconds. I couldn't see the image, but I could see everything around it. The system reactions, the micro delays, the strain on the signal. And then I saw something that didn't make sense. The signal didn't drop immediately. It narrowed. like something had interfered with it. Not randomly, not like damage, more like pressure. The bandwidth compressed for a fraction of a second before it disappeared entirely, as if something had passed between the camera and the surface, too close, closer than the frame even showed. I sat there longer than I should have, replaying that sequence over and over, trying to convince myself it was just coincidence, just system stress. But then I checked the timing. The exact moment the signal narrowed matched the moment that eye should have been closest to the lens. That's when it shifted for me again. Because that means it wasn't just visible, it was physically there, close enough to interfere, close enough to block, close enough to understand where the camera was. I remember pulling my hands away from the console like I'd touched something hot. Because up until then, there was still a version of this where it was just an animal, massive, unknown, but still just reacting, still just passing through. That version didn't survive the logs. This wasn't random movement. It approached. It aligned. And at the exact moment it looked into the camera, the signal collapsed. Not before, not after, during. That's not curiosity. That's interaction. I didn't finish the full analysis. I couldn't. Not because there wasn't more to see, but because I already knew where it was going. And I didn't want to follow it all the way to whatever conclusion was waiting there. But one detail keeps replaying anyway. Not from the video, from the data. Right before the final cut, right before the signal narrowed, there was a tiny fluctuation in the depth reading. Barely noticeable, just a slight shift, upward, like something below the camera had moved closer. Not passing by, not circling, rising, toward it, toward us. And I keep thinking about how little time passed between that movement and the moment it looked directly into the lens. I tried to stop digging after that. I really did. There's a point where knowing more doesn't help. It just makes the shape of it clearer. But something about that upward movement wouldn't leave me alone. It was small, almost nothing, the kind of detail you're supposed to ignore. So I didn't. I cross-checked the surrounding data, not just our system, everything we had running in that window. Environmental sensors, external readings, anything that might give context. At first, nothing stood out. Then I widened the time frame. Just a few minutes before the 2 seconds. That's when I saw it. A pressure shift. Not dramatic, not enough to trigger alerts, but consistent, gradual. Like something large was displacing water over time instead of all at once. And it wasn't moving randomly. It was converging. All the subtle changes, tiny fluctuations across different sensors, they pointed inward, toward a single location, toward us. I remember staring at that pattern, tracing it again and again, hoping I was misreading it, hoping it was coincidence. But the more I aligned the timestamps, the clearer it became. It hadn't just passed by earlier. It had been closing distance for minutes, slowly, deliberately. That changes things in a way I don't think people understand right away, because it means the first flicker we saw, the one we almost ignored, that wasn't the beginning. That was already mid-approach. We didn't notice it when it was far away. We only noticed it when it wanted to be noticed. That thought sat with me longer than anything else, because it reframes those 2 seconds. They weren't chance. They were timing. And then there's one more detail I wish I hadn't found. It's small, easy to overlook. I almost did. Right after the initial flicker, right after that first glimpse, there's a gap in the data. Less than a second. A tiny dropout that we wrote off as normal instability. But when I lined it up with everything else, it didn't behave like a glitch. It behaved like something entering range. Not visual range, detection range. Like the system didn't just see it, It suddenly had something to measure. That's when it started tracking movement. That's when the displacement readings began. That's when the slow convergence started, which means before that moment, it was already there, just beyond what we could detect. I leaned back from the screen after that and just sat there, not really thinking, just holding that idea in place. Because if that's true, then everything we experienced, the flicker, the approach, the final 2 seconds, that was only the part we were allowed to perceive. Everything before that? Invisible. And that's the part that gets under your skin. Not the size, not the eye, but the time we didn't see. The time it spent close enough to matter before it ever showed itself at all. I stopped going through the data after that. Not because there wasn't more, I'm sure there was, but because I'd already crossed the line where answers start to feel worse than questions. So I tried to go back to normal. Routine, sleep, noise, anything to drown out the quiet. It didn't work, because once you've seen a pattern like that, your brain doesn't let it go. It keeps replaying it, fitted into places it shouldn't belong. A few nights after we got back, I woke up for no reason. No sound, no dream, just awake. The room was completely still, that heavy kind of silence that presses in on your ears. And for a second, just a second, I felt it again. Not fear exactly. That same slow, heavy awareness from the control room, like something was close. I told myself it was nothing. Residual stress. Your mind does that after long deployments, after confined spaces and constant noise. It fills the silence with something familiar. But then I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The quiet wasn't empty. There was a vibration. So faint, I almost missed it. Not a sound you hear, something you feel. Low, irregular, just beneath perception. I held my breath, to be sure. It didn't stop. And I hate admitting this part, but I didn't move. I just lay there, completely still, listening to it, or feeling it, trying to convince myself it was coming from somewhere normal. Pipes, distant traffic, anything. But it didn't behave like that. It pulsed, not randomly, not mechanically, in a way that felt structured. That's when the memory snapped back into place. The audio from the ocean. That same low-frequency pattern we cleaned and isolated. Not identical, but close enough that my chest tightened the same way it did in that room. I got up after that, checked everything. Windows, walls, floor. There was nothing. No source. No explanation. And the moment I started moving, it stopped. Instantly, like it had never been there. I stood there for a long time after that, just waiting for it to come back. It didn't, but the absence felt wrong. Too clean, too complete. The same way the feed had felt after it cut. That's when something settled in that I haven't been able to shake since. Maybe it wasn't the ocean. Maybe that was just where we noticed it first. Because the pattern, the approach, the timing, the way it revealed itself, that doesn't feel tied to a place. It feels tied to attention. Like it gets closer the more you look, the more you analyze, the more you try to understand it. And I keep thinking about that last moment on the feed. The eye. The way it didn't react like something surprised. It just looked. Like it had already found us long before we ever found it. And the worst part is this. That vibration I felt in my room. It didn't start suddenly. It felt like something I had just become aware of, after it had already been there for a while. I started avoiding quiet after that. Not consciously at first, just small things. Leaving the TV on, letting something play in the background while I slept. Even when I wasn't really watching it. I told myself it was just habit, just readjusting after being out there for so long. But that wasn't it. I didn't want to hear it again. Because once you recognize a pattern, even faintly, your brain starts searching for it everywhere. In low hums, in distant engines, in the space between sounds. Most of the time, I could convince myself it wasn't the same. Most of the time. A week passed, maybe more. I wasn't sleeping much, so time started to blur. Everything felt slightly off, like I was half a step out of sync with the rest of the world. And then it happened again. Not at night this time, middle of the day. That's what made it worse. I was sitting still, doing nothing important, when I felt it, faint, low, barely there. That same kind of vibration, just under the edge of hearing. I froze. Didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until my chest started to ache. It pulsed once. Then again. Slow. Uneven. Not mechanical. Not random. I remember looking around like I expected to see something move. Like there would be a source I could point to and say, "There. That's it. That's all this is." There wasn't. And then I made a mistake. I focused on it. Not just noticing, really listening, trying to map the rhythm, compare it, confirm it. That's when it changed. Subtly, but enough. The space between pulses shortened, just a little, like it had responded. I wish I could say I imagined that part. I've tried to convince myself I did. Stress, lack of sleep, everything piling up. But I know what I felt. I know the difference between something constant and something adjusting. And that wasn't constant. I stood up too fast, knocked something over. I don't even remember what. The noise broke it, completely. Silence again. That same empty, clean silence. Like a switch had been flipped. I didn't feel relief. That's the strange part. I felt noticed. That's the word that keeps coming back. Not attacked, not threatened, just noticed. Like I had done something I wasn't supposed to. Like I had crossed a line by paying too much attention. I haven't tried to listen that closely since. I still hear it sometimes. Faint, distant, easy to ignore if I don't focus. So I don't. Because I keep thinking back to the data. The way it approached us in the water. Slow, deliberate, closing distance over time, not reacting, tracking. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever we saw down there, whatever looked into that camera, it didn't stop when the feed cut. It just changed how it was reaching us. And the closer you try to get to understanding it, the closer it seems to get back. I tried to stay away from anything connected to it after that. No logs, no reports, no late night, just one more check moments. I kept things surface level, routine, predictable. If there was a pattern, I wasn't going to follow it anymore. That lasted longer than I expected, until I realized it wasn't just happening to me. It came up casually. That's what makes it worse. Not a warning, not a report. Just a conversation that drifted somewhere it shouldn't have. One of the others mentioned sleep issues. Another joked about hearing things, low hums, nothing clear. The kind of comment you're supposed to brush off. Stress, adjustment. Same explanations I'd been using. I didn't say anything at first. I just listened. And the more they talked, the more the details lined up in ways they shouldn't have. Not identical, not obvious, but close enough. Timing, the way it only happened in still moments. The way it seemed to stop the second they tried to isolate it. The way it felt like it had already been there before they noticed it. That's when it stopped being personal. That's when it became a pattern. I asked a few careful questions. Nothing direct, just enough to confirm what I already knew. None of them had checked the logs again. None of them had tried to understand it. They were ignoring it, and it was staying distant. That realization hit harder than anything before it. because it meant the difference between them and me wasn't exposure, it was attention. I had looked deeper. I had followed it further. And whatever this was, it had followed that. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of hearing it again, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I did. And sometime near morning, when everything was completely still, I felt it again. Stronger, closer, not loud, never loud, but undeniable. The pattern had tightened, the pauses shorter, the rhythm more consistent, less like something drifting, more like something locking in. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even let myself fully acknowledge it, because a thought had started forming, and I didn't want to give it shape. But it formed anyway. If it gets closer when you focus, then what happens when it gets close enough? The vibration pulsed again, and for the first time since this started, it didn't stop when I stayed still. It stayed. I broke my own rule the next day. I went back to the logs, not the official ones, the archived fragments, the pieces we weren't supposed to rely on, raw, messy data that hadn't been cleaned or explained away. If there was a pattern, I needed to see it clearly. I started mapping timelines, not just the encounter, but everything after. When each of us reported issues, when the anomalies in the system peaked, when the audio was strongest. And then I added something else, my own experiences, the nights I felt it, the moments it changed, the times it got stronger. I didn't expect them to line up. They did. Not perfectly, but enough. There was a delay, a gap between the encounter and the first time I noticed anything at home. Then another gap before it intensified. Then shorter gaps, like something closing distance, not through space, through awareness. I hate how that sounds, but it's the only way it fits. And then I saw the part I can't unsee. Right before the final 2 seconds, the moment it filled the frame, there was a sharp acceleration in all readings. Movement, pressure, audio. Everything spiked at once, like it had reached a threshold, like it had gotten as close as it needed to be. And that's when it revealed itself. Not before, not gradually, at the exact point of maximum proximity. I sat there staring at that alignment for a long time, because if that pattern holds, if that same progression applies now, then what I've been experiencing isn't random. It's the same approach, just slower, more controlled. The vibration started again while I was still sitting there. Not faint this time, clear, present, right there in the room with me. I didn't turn, I didn't move, because I already knew what I was afraid of. That if I reacted, if I acknowledged it fully, it would do the same thing it did down there, close the final distance. And this time, there wouldn't be a camera between us. I don't know exactly when I crossed the line from observing to participating. There isn't a clean moment where it changes. It's gradual, quiet, the same way it approached us in the water. But there was a point where I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. It wasn't just getting closer. It was waiting. Not in a passive way. Not like something stuck or drifting. Like something pacing itself. Matching me. Every time I focused, it adjusted. Every time I tried to ignore it, it pulled back just enough to stay at the edge. Not gone. Never gone. Just outside of certainty. That's control. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I tested it. I shouldn't have, but I did. I sat in complete silence. No distractions, no background noise, no movement. Just me, waiting. At first, nothing. Then the faintest vibration, distant, uncommitted. I focused on it, and it responded. Not instantly, not dramatically, but enough. The rhythm tightened, the pauses shortened. Closer. I stopped focusing. It eased back. Still there, but less defined, like it was respecting distance or measuring it. My chest felt tight the entire time, but I didn't stop. Because at that point, fear wasn't the strongest thing anymore. Understanding was, and understanding led me somewhere worse. This wasn't random. This wasn't residual. This was interaction, not communication, not in any way I understand, but something close enough to it that the difference doesn't matter. I leaned forward slightly, not much, just enough to commit to the moment. The vibration deepened, not louder, heavier, like it wasn't just around me anymore, like it had weight. And for a split second, just a split second, I felt something else layered under it. Pressure. Not on my ears, on my chest, like standing too close to something massive. I broke, stood up too fast, knocked the chair back, noise filling the room in a way that felt almost violent. And just like that, it was gone. Completely. That clean, empty silence again. But I knew something then that I can't unknow. It didn't disappear because it had to. It disappeared because I ended it, because I stepped away, because I stopped engaging. Which means if I hadn't, if I had stayed still a few seconds longer, it would have kept going. Closer and closer, until whatever happened next happened. That's the edge I walked away from, and I haven't gone back since. I wish I could say it stopped after that. That breaking the pattern, interrupting it, ended whatever connection had formed. It didn't. It just changed again. Now it doesn't come as often, but when it does, it's different. There's no slow build anymore, no distant phase. It starts closer, like it remembers, like it doesn't need to begin from the same point. And that's the part that scares me more than anything before, because it means progress doesn't reset, it carries over. The last time it happened, I didn't even realize what I was feeling at first. Just that same heavy stillness, that slight pressure in the room. Then the vibration, already formed, already structured, like it had skipped the early stages entirely. I didn't move, not out of curiosity this time, out of certainty, because I finally understood the pattern completely. Attention is distance, focus is movement, acknowledgement is permission, and I had already done all three too many times. The pulses came faster, closer together, no hesitation, no testing. It wasn't learning anymore, it knew. I kept my eyes fixed on one spot, not because I thought I'd see anything, but because I was afraid I might, that something would finally cross from what I could feel to what I could see. The pressure in my chest built slowly, like before, but steadier now, more controlled. Like it wasn't pushing, it was arriving. And then, for the first time since this started, it didn't stop when I wanted it to. I tried to pull back mentally, tried to break focus, shift attention, anything. It didn't matter. It held, right there, present, unmoving, like it had reached the same point it did in the ocean, maximum proximity. I don't know how long it lasted, seconds, maybe longer. Time doesn't behave normally when you're that aware of something you can't see. And then, just like that, it eased. Not gone, not cut, just receded on its own, like it had decided something, like it had reached whatever threshold it needed. That's what I'm left with now. Not just the memory of those 2 seconds, but the certainty that whatever we encountered, whatever came close enough to look into that camera, didn't just approach us once. It's been approaching ever since. And the worst part isn't that it can get closer. It's that I don't think I'm the one controlling how far it goes anymore. I don't try to prove it anymore. That's the first thing that changed. No more logs. No more patterns mapped out on screens. No more late nights trying to turn something unexplainable into something structured. I stopped looking for confirmation the moment I realized confirmation wasn't the problem. It was never hiding. It was waiting. That's the part that settles in the deepest, because it reshapes everything that came before it. The ocean, the approach, the 2 seconds. That wasn't a discovery. It was a threshold, and I crossed it. I think about that eye sometimes. Not the size of it, not the way it filled the frame, just the stillness, the lack of reaction, like it wasn't surprised to find us there, like it had already accounted for us. That feeling hasn't left. It's quieter now. Most days, I don't notice anything at all. No vibration, no pressure. Nothing that I could point to and say, there, that's it. But that doesn't mean it's gone. That's the mistake I made at the beginning, thinking absence meant distance. It doesn't. I understand the pattern now well enough to know better. It doesn't need to announce itself anymore. Not after everything I've already done. Not after all the times I focused, tracked, followed it further than I should have. You don't reset something like that. You don't go back to before. You just stop being aware of how close it is. That's what I believe now. Not that it left, not that it lost interest, just that it doesn't need to close the distance in ways I can measure anymore. Sometimes, in very quiet moments, I still catch myself almost listening. Not intentionally, just a reflex. Like part of me expects to feel it again. And every time that happens, I force myself to stop. Because I finally understand the last rule. Attention isn't just how it finds you, it's how it arrives. And I've already let it get close enough once. Those 2 seconds on the feed, everyone keeps calling that the encounter. They're wrong. That was the moment it confirmed something. Not about the ocean, not about what it is, about me. Because it didn't react like something discovered. It reacted like something that had been tracking me long before I ever knew it existed. And the reason I'm telling you all this isn't to warn you about what's out there. It's to warn you about what happens next. Because now you know the pattern, too. Now you understand how it moves, how it waits, how it closes distance. And if you're anything like me, you're going to think about it later. In a quiet room. In a still moment. You're going to wonder if it's real. And without meaning to, you're going to listen. That's all it takes. Not proof, not sight. Just that small shift in attention. That moment where curiosity outweighs caution. That's where it starts. That's where it started for me. And if I'm right, if the pattern holds the way I think it does, then the worst part isn't that something is out there. It's that by the time you notice it, it's already been close to you for a while.